Thanks for inviting us in. This is the Delphi Debrief here on WTHR+. Day 13 of the Delphi murders trial brought the first full day of Richard Allen's attorneys presenting their case. But they had to pivot quickly when they weren't able to present key pieces of their defense. In a moment, our legal expert, Katie Jackson-Lindsay, will be in studio to help us break down the importance of today's developments. But first, we want to get right to Delphi with senior investigative reporter Bob Siegel and Emily Longnecker. So Bob and Emily, this was a busy day for the defense team.
It was, and it was an important day, I think, for the defense to really start strong. They got a couple of witnesses in yesterday. I think it wasn't real clear to them when the state was going to rest its case. Today was really the first full day that we got from the defense, and it was important, I think, for them to start off strong, and I'm not sure necessarily that they did.
Maybe not so much. I mean, you were there in the morning, but I think, didn't you characterize it as a little bit of damage control?
Yes, yeah, I think today was about damage control for them based on what we heard yesterday. We'll talk about that in a second. First, let me remind you where we are. Right behind us, directly behind us, is the Carroll County Courthouse, where we've been pretty much living for,
pretty much.
2.5 weeks at this point. And we have some wonderful space right across the street from the courthouse where we work throughout the day, kind of our home base during the Delphi murders trial. So that's where we are this evening as we bring you tonight's show. And let's get you started, as we usually do, by running down the list of witnesses that testified in court today. So that list involves Christopher Godey. He is a Hammond police officer who testified about one of the interviews that he did. He was brought in to do some interviews immediately right after the murders took place. He testified about that. We heard from Dr. Deanna Dwenger. She is a behavioral health director for the Indiana Department of Correction. Max Baker, he has been for the last 2 years an intern for the defense team, and he was on the witness stand today. Brad Heath and David McCain, they are local residents, and they testified about what they saw on the day that the murders took place. Daryl Starrett, he's a former Delphi fire chief. Steve Mullen, former Delphi police chief, and Tobe Lesenby, former Carroll County sheriff. Lots of folks who were certainly very involved in the search and in parts of the investigations. Right. We heard from them as well. But we want to start with the Max Baker testimony, because as you were saying, this we knew that the defense wanted to get off on a positive foot, and they really needed to when you keep in mind what happened yesterday. And yesterday, you might remember, that's the day that the state closed, and they presented their most damaging evidence of this entire trial involving Richard Allen.
Right, those confessions.
It was his confessions. And during those confessions, these were jailhouse phone calls that Richard Allen made to his wife and to his mother. And he says over and over again, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby during those phone calls. Really extraordinarily damaging to the defense in this case. So today was a day, kind of some damage control in order to be able to deal with what the jury had heard yesterday. And so they decided to put Max Baker on the stand today because he has put together some videos. And when you think about it, it's kind of a brilliant idea. There was this really damaging audio from yesterday that the jury just heard about Richard Allen talking about, I committed these murders. To try to counteract that today, they put Max Baker on the stand, and he was going to talk about these videos. He talked about one video that is Richard Allen in his prison cell, and it's a compilation of day after day after day after day showing Richard Allen in his prison cell and the extreme conditions that he was under that perhaps could cause some severe mental health problems for him. And then another video that shows how Allen was treated outside of his cell. And the jury was told that they were going to see those videos of Richard Allen inside prison right around the same time of the confessions. And that plan pretty much blew up in the defense's face today. The video that showed him chained and shackled as he moves through the prison and his bizarre behavior during the time frame of his incriminating statements we're going to show, the jury never got to see that video because prosecutor Nick McLeland, he objected because he said the defense couldn't confirm the actual dates when the videos were taken. The judge and the attorneys discussed this for over an hour. Twice the jury was sent out of the courtroom while things were being worked out. Ultimately, the judge said that she will allow the videos to be shown, but only if the defense is able to verify the dates. So that evidence might come on another day, maybe sometime next week. But Emily, for today, what a missed opportunity to very quickly counteract what the jury just saw yesterday with these damaging confessions,
Right.
and the opportunity to kind of flip the switch a little bit to show a Richard Allen potentially who was really suffering.
Right, in terrible conditions.
They claim mental health issues.
Right, and as they've claimed before, in terrible conditions, being monitored 24/7, although they've testified that that's typical, right? When somebody is in state prison, monitored 24/7, inmates sitting outside his door, inmates harassing him, yelling at him, calling him a
Yes.
baby killer. We've all heard testimony on that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, all the things that the defense is saying led to him having a serious mental breakdown,
Yeah.
a psychotic episode.
So I could see the strategy that the defense team was planning to do today, and I think it seemed like it was a good strategy to be able to kind of switch directions and provide some, what we expect would be some pretty powerful video images of Richard Allen inside prison, the way he was, in his cell. We've heard that, he was rolling around naked in his own feces and banging his head against the wall of the prison so hard that he got two black eyes.
Right.
I would think for the jury to be able to switch off of the confessions to seeing that video would have been very helpful for the defense, but that didn't happen
Not
today. And it kind of makes you wonder, because obviously these are videos that we believe the defense has had for quite a long time, and not, if the idea is we want to show that at the time of his confessions, he was not mentally stable, that he was suffering from mental illness, and that's why he confessed. If that's what you're trying to convince the jury about,
Right.
to not know the dates exactly, to be able to pinpoint
Right.
those dates for the jury and for the judge, and certainly for the state,
Right.
who you would expect is going to say, wait a second, if you're trying to make this argument, you got to show that these videos are from the same time period that we're talking about here
Right.
when they made the confessions. That seemed to be a huge oversight on the part of the defense.
Yeah, you got to be ready. You got to be ready for that.
So they were still able to get some of these arguments in about his mental health, and that came from one of the witnesses that came early on this morning, and that is a behavioral health specialist for the Indiana Department of Correction. Her name is Dr. Deanna Dwenger, and she testified that Richard Allen was diagnosed with what's called serious mental illness. That's actually an actual diagnosis, and that he was also determined to be gravely disabled, another diagnosis, and that he was determined to be those things right around the time of his confessions. And Dr. Dwenger also said she was concerned about Allen's complete lack of privacy, that he was being videotaped all the time. She was concerned about the threats that he was getting from other inmates, like Emily had mentioned, calling him baby killer and saying, you should kill yourself or we're going to kill you, things like that. And she said that the amount of time that he spent in solitary confinement was toxic and could have caused his mental health to deteriorate. And, those were things, again, that that's very much part of the argument that the defense is trying to make to counter the confessions, to say that he was not thinking clearly when he made the confessions.
He was in a bad place when he said all of these things to his wife and mother.
And so from that perspective, it seemed like Dr. Dwenger's testimony today was helpful to the defense. It seemed like they made some progress in that regard. I think coupled along with video of actually showing Richard Allen in prison at the time of his confessions, and that could have been even more powerful. Again, missed opportunity, but they were able to to get in at least a little bit of that line of thinking, kind of plant some seeds in the jury's mind to have them question about his frame of mind and his mental health at the time that he made the confessions.
Yeah.
So that was a really important part, and that's kind of how the day started. But probably the other big story that came out of today's testimony here on day 13 was what happened at the very end.
Yeah, how the day ended. Judge Gull ruled that the defense cannot enter in this alternate theory and these third-party suspects. And we know that the defense has wanted to enter in the fact that they believe the girls were killed in this ritualistic killing and enter in and call to the witness stand some people that they believe could possibly be involved in this. And we know that they've tried to do this before and filed motions on it, and Judge Gull had said no from those pretrial hearings that we attended, right, over the summer. But then they filed 2 more motions since the trial has started on this, and they basically, the defense's argument was this, that the testimony that we've heard over the past 2 weeks has opened the door for them to now be able to present this alternate theory. And they've pointed to a couple things. They pointed to, first, those photos of the girls' bodies with the sticks on them. We know that Jerry Holman testified that he thought that those sticks on the bodies were likely about concealment. But then he also said that they could possibly be have to do with an undoing. And we talked about what an undoing is in law enforcement speak, when someone has killed someone to undo the act, basically, to try and seemingly undo it in some way and give some kind of respect to the victims, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying that because Jerry Holman talked about those things, they want to be able to present an alternate theory about what those sticks were about. And they also pointed out that Jerry Holman had said, he believed that one person was involved in this, because if more than one person would be involved, it's been his experience in investigations that people talk, they say things. And the defense has said, look, we have some people, and they've put this out there in their Frank's memo and in several court documents, the names and lists of people who we've decided not to name quite yet here, but the names of people that they say have been talking, have been talking and said possibly that they might have something to do about this. So again, they filed these 2 motions to be able to enter that in, to address that in court. And Judge Gull said today, no way, you haven't drawn the nexus, you haven't drawn the connection, you haven't shown me the direct connection. So that is a big no on Odinism and these third-party suspects. So that was right at the end of the day. And Andrew Baldwin said, okay, Judge, and that was it.
And that's huge. And not only is that a setback for the defense, because we know that that is an element that they really wanted to discuss and present to the jury, but we also were planning on having as many as 120 witnesses on their witness list, that presumably witnesses and time that they were going to spend talking to the jury about this alternate perpetrator theory that now the judge has said is off the table, which will impact, I believe, the length of this trial, because a lot of those witnesses that they were planning to bring now would not be coming to testify, wouldn't be allowed to testify.
Witnesses that they've already deposed, and witnesses we know from testimony that law enforcement also talked to in the course of this investigation.
Yes.
So. And
that's a big development
it's a
today,
huge
really big development. So
yeah.
Scott, we're going to send it back to you, because I'm sure Katie has a few things to say about that development here today. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it certainly is, Bob and Emily. We'll get back to you in a moment. Katie Jackson Lindsay's a former deputy prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, and she's been with us every night breaking down what she is hearing Bob and Emily talk about when they are listening to the testimony inside the Delphi courthouse. So let's talk about the judge's ruling today that the defense cannot bring in this alternate suspects theory, and therefore can't talk about what they believe was a ritualistic killing, perhaps some sort of Odinism killing. How big a blow is this to the defense?
It's a major blow. Throughout the state's case, we have, you and I have talked about this instruction that the jury receives that says, if this evidence lends itself to 2 reasonable interpretations, the jury has to choose the interpretation consistent with Richard Allen's innocence. And so in essence, Judge Gull's ruling prohibits the defense from even introducing another reasonable interpretation for the state's evidence because they're not allowed to develop that theory or that possibility at all for the jury to consider.
Let's talk about the other perhaps setback for the defense, this idea that they wanted to go ahead and introduce some videos that would show Richard Allen's state of mind and what he was going through when he was being incarcerated, that he was being held and shackled and, under suicide watch, and the fact that the defense was unable to get those videos in because the judge said, hey, you can put them in so long as you can verify the dates that these videos were taken. Is that a setback, or is that a temporary setback until they can somehow verify the dates of these videos?
Well, I would assume it's a setback for sure, but I would assume that it's a temporary setback. I don't know the format in which they received these videos, if they were received from the state as discovery, or if they were received based on a third-party request directly to the Department of Correction. But I would assume someone this weekend is working really, really hard to be able to confirm those dates and present that evidence to the jury in a way that they can confirm those dates. It's not easy to tell the reason for Judge Gull's ruling on that, however. I know that a lot of these arguments were made at sidebar, and so our reporters are not privy to the exact arguments that were made. But in terms of admitting evidence like this, there has to be a foundation that it is what it purports to be, and then there has to be relevance. It has to be relevant to the issues that are before the jury. And so I would think they would be able to establish relevance without those dates, because what we heard at the end of the state's case is that allegedly Richard Allen's confessions began as early as that November 14th phone call when he originally said to his wife, if you're getting tired of this, I'll tell them whatever they want to know. And so the state suggested that was the beginning of the confessions. So we know that Richard Allen went into these conditions in that jail very early on, as early as November 3rd, when the safekeeping motion was granted. And so it would seem to me that it shouldn't matter at what point these conditions are being shown to the jury, because the conditions that he was under from the time he got there through the time of these confessions should be relevant. So it's a little bit confusing as to why she deemed that would have been a requirement. But either way, I think the defense will end up working that out.
Let's get your insight on Dr. Dwenger's testimony. Dr. Dwenger was the one who said that Richard Allen was diagnosed with serious mental illness and was gravely disabled at the time, around the time that he was making these confessions while he was being incarcerated. What kind of impact does that testimony have on the jury and the defense's case?
Well, it should have a significant impact, because now they know that what the defense is trying to build is that he was mentally impaired at the time. That's been confirmed by a defense witness conclusively. Serious mental illness, grave disability. I'm not a doctor, but it doesn't take a doctor to understand that is impacting someone's mental health, it's impacting their mental state, and therefore it's impacting the things that come out of their mouth. And so I think that was powerful, and I think that we can tell how the jury is processing that based on their questions for that witness. We know that they asked her questions about whether or not she could determine if he was faking. They also asked her questions about what sort of things to look for if a person is faking a mental illness, and she gave them a pretty comprehensive list. So the great thing about that is that now they can apply their own reasoning to that and determine, based on what she told them, did they notice any of those things to suggest that he was faking. And so they're doing what we want jurors to do. They're keeping an open mind, they're asking questions, and they're trying to apply the evidence to what they're hearing.
Okay, so we'll get some more analysis from Katie in a moment, but Bob and Emily, I want to bring you back in because the former police chief and the sheriff took the witness stand today. Fill us in on how that went.
Yeah, former Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lesenby took the witness stand today, Bob, and he testified that at this point he believes that Richard Allen is the only person that committed these murders now, but he says that that was not always the case. And he said initially when this happened, again, he was the sheriff here in Carroll County, he characterized his role at the time as an administrative role, not necessarily boots on the ground, but he testified when this first happened, it was initially unknown how many people were involved. But when the defense questioned him, they asked him about a deposition he gave to the defense in August of 2023. And at that time, Lesenby said under oath that he thought multiple people were involved in this crime, at least 2. Now, keep in mind, Richard Allen had been arrested 10 months before. Lesenby is saying this in this deposition. He was also asked on the stand today who else in the investigation, in that central command, thought that more than one person could be involved, and he said lead investigator Tony Liggett. So he was letting, the jury was able to hear that law enforcement on this case at one point thought that more than one person was involved, but at this point now, they believe that it's just Richard Allen involved. So
yeah, they seem to have changed. I mean, even when you go back and think about the original press conference that they had when they announced that they had arrested Richard Allen for this, there was discussion about the fact that we still have the tip line open.
Right.
We are still looking for information.
That's right.
And we are looking for information about other suspects. And we heard over the summer during testimony from some of the law enforcement officers that they said that all along they were told that they were looking for possibly 2, 3, 4, 5 different people who could be involved in this. So interesting. It seems like their perception has changed over time.
Changed. Or at least, I mean, that's how they characterized it today. We also heard from Steve Mullen. He is the former police chief of the Delphi Police Department. He's now a lead investigator for the state, for the prosecution. The defense really attacked the investigation here, and the 2 sets of missing videos that have come up. They interviewed dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds of people in those early days after the crime and throughout that first year, and many of those videos are missing. Videos from February 14th to March 21st, 2017. Dozens and dozens of interviews are missing from some kind of glitch, some kind of recording problem. Nothing there. There's also videos missing from April 28th to June 2nd of 2017. They've been able to recover some of the video, but not the audio. So Andrew Baldwin started out by asking about that and asked Steve Mullen, why is missing evidence important? And Mullen said because of the integrity of the case. And he also testified that, look, dozens and dozens of these video interviews are missing for both of us. We can't look at them anymore. You can't look at them anymore. And Baldwin asked him, did you write up a report each time that this happened, that you realized these videos were missing? And Steve Mullen said, yes, he wrote reports, but he did not put dates on these reports, right? And so I think Baldwin is trying to get at the fact, the defense had taken exception to the fact that it was several months before they even knew that there had been these videos that existed, and now these videos no longer were there. And so he wanted to know of Steve Mullen, did you put a date on these reports when you realized the videos were missing? And Steve Mullen said, no, I didn't. And Baldwin really hammered him on this, asked him, if you could do it again and put dates on these reports, would you do it? And Mullen replied, if I knew you were going to do this to me now, yes. And then he kind of scoffed. He went like this and scoffed. And Baldwin said, do you think this is funny? And he said, I do not. And it was at that point that I looked over at the jury to kind of see their reaction. And 2 jurors, 5 and 6, they were just kind of shaking their head like this. So the defense also asked Mullen about Brad Weber. We know Brad Weber, we heard his testimony the other day. There's some inconsistencies about whether when he left that Subaru plant, I think 202, if he went right home. It's a 25-minute drive home. He testified the other day on the stand for the state that, yes, he went right home. But we heard about some inconsistencies that, no, wait a minute, you in the beginning of this, when this first happened, you told some investigators that you had gone to work on some ATM machines, right? So,
and just to reiterate, he lives like
right there at the end of the private drive
to the crime scene where the girls' bodies were found.
Across the creek from where the girls' bodies were found, right? So apparently we learned today through Steve Mullen's testimony that Steve Mullen and Jerry Holman called up Weber in August, and it was after they saw that Dr. Monica Waller report where Richard Allen is talking about the van, talking about he got scared, right?
Yes.
He got scared
Yep.
because he saw a van and he took the girls across the creek and he murdered them, right? So they have this thing about this van. So then they call up Mr. Weber in August and they tell him we want to talk to you, and they go and talk to him. And Mullen testified today that he told them, yes, I drove my white van, and yes, I drove it right home. And Baldwin seemed to suggest in his line of questioning, he wanted to know, basically, did you prep Brad Weber about what you were going to talk about that next day when you came to visit him? And Mullen said, no, we didn't tell him anything at all. We just came and talked to him. And Baldwin said, well, how did he know that? How was he able to recall white van and that he went right home, all these years ago? And Mullen said, well, he checked his text. He told us he was able to tell exactly what it was because he went back and he looked at his text. And Baldwin said, well, so why was he checking his text? Like, why would he have known to do that, to check his text and look back? And Mullen said, I can't answer that. I don't know. So that was an interesting moment. But Mullen did admit that, yes, there is a conflict between what Brad Weber said in those early days, right after the murders, and what he's saying now.
And Monday will be an interesting day because our understanding is Brad Weber is going to be called back to the stand to testify on Monday. Last time we saw him, he left the courtroom very angry. Really, raised his voice while he was being questioned by the defense team. That should be very interesting testimony that we are eager to see on Monday.
Another interesting moment in this, when Mullen was testifying about, discussing Brad Weber, Andrew Baldwin asked him, what kind of gun does Brad Weber have that you tested? And he said, a Sig Sauer. And then he said, but those tests determined that Brad Weber's gun was not involved. And we know that from the testimony that we listened to, I can't even remember the day now, that Brad Weber's gun, the gun expert testified his gun was not excluded.
Correct.
Not necessarily not involved, right? But Mullen made a point of saying our tests show
undetermined.
Right, exactly. Our tests show that this is Richard Allen's gun. So a couple more things came up. I mean, they had Steve Mullen on the stand for a long time.
And we should point out, this is, I believe, his fourth time that he has taken the witness stand. And, I suppose maybe that's not that unusual based on the fact that not only was he the former police chief, or he was the police chief at the time that the murders took place, but he has since moved on to the role of lead investigator for the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office. So he's been instrumentally involved in the investigation and the questioning and compiling evidence.
Yeah.
And he's been a really key witness who's taken the stand.
A lot.
Yes.
And a few more things came out. Baldwin asked him how many tips have come in about Richard Allen being on the trail that day, and he said only one. And then Baldwin asked him, did law enforcement get numerous tips saying that they recognized the voice on that video, the down the hill video? And Mullen testified that over the years, we've gotten hundreds of people who said they knew the voice on that video. That's what he said, but he didn't elaborate on that. And then of course, Baldwin asked him, before Richard Allen was arrested, how many times did he confess? And Mullen said none. So those were some other key moments that came out. He was, on the stand for quite a long time. So
he was, and again, the jurors have been listening very, very closely. They've continued to ask a lot of questions. One of the questions that I want to point out here that they asked actually elicited some of the most interesting testimony of the day. I think some of the most helpful testimony of the day for jurors. And Katie had mentioned that just a little bit ago. While Dr. Dwenger was testifying, she was basically done with her testimony, and one of the jurors asked a question about, when faking mental health concerns, could a person kind of slip in truths into a confession? And that brought up a discussion by Dr. Dwenger about how to tell if someone is faking mental illness versus genuine psychosis. And her answer here was really interesting. She said, if it's a brief psychotic episode, the person would be detached from the story that they are telling. So if a story is organized and if it makes sense and it's chronological, chances are that as a person's talking, that their story is probably they're faking it, because someone who is genuinely experiencing psychosis, their story would be disorganized, not easily followed, not chronological. Those would be signs of someone perhaps being delusional or psychotic. So the jury today, again, continuing to ask really important questions, Scott, and showing that they continue to be really engaged in the testimony that's being given.
All right, Bob and Emily, we'll get back to you. Let's bring Katie back in and find out her analysis of what we've been hearing from day 13 of the testimony. So we've heard a little bit more about the former Carroll County Sheriff and the former Delphi Police Chief. What were some of the things that caught your attention?
Well, the first thing that sticks out to me as a trial attorney, having worked on both sides, is that it's just not a good look for the state, for the defense to be calling state's witnesses or state actors. As a prosecutor, you have to show all of your scars. You have to show all the facts of your case, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so when you have defense attorneys calling people like the former fire chief, the former police chief, the former sheriff, that's just not a good look, because it's telling the jury, especially the witnesses that had already testified, it's telling the juries, hey, wait a minute. These guys had something to say that you didn't want us to hear. And so the feedback that I've gotten from jurors over the years is that they felt lied to, or they felt that the prosecution was hiding evidence. So that's just not a good strategy for the state. And we talked about this before. Each time the state objected to the defense's questions going beyond the scope of their questions, meaning you can't talk about it because we didn't bring it up, it puts the onus on the defense to recall these witnesses. And they're doing just that. And the jury must have some questions about that, and it causes distrust. So it's just really bad strategy on the part of the state to allow that to happen. But in terms of what we're hearing from them, so you take that idea that it already doesn't look good, that these are state actors being called by the defense, they're also providing just that, evidence that was left out by the state. They are pointing out inconsistencies. They are talking about things that happened that we didn't hear in the state's case in chief, like dozens of interviews missing. That's really powerful strategy on the part of the defense to actually call those witnesses and tell what they're telling the jury is, listen to what the state didn't tell you. And the jury has been advised through those instructions that a reasonable doubt can arise from the evidence or a lack of evidence. And now they're hearing about that lack of evidence.
And that was what came up from the former Carroll County Sheriff, who was testifying that some of these recorded interviews have disappeared.
Exactly, and also from Mullen, who was the police chief at the time, who now works for the prosecutor's office.
Right, lead prosecutor, right?
That's just double bad, right? Because not only is he the former police chief, he currently works for the prosecutor's office.
Right, as the lead investigator for the prosecutor's office.
So now the defense is calling as a witness someone who works for the prosecutor's office to make their points. The prosecution should have never allowed that to happen. That's just really bad strategy. And so for the defense, I think that this is really good strategy. And even though their case may seem a little discombobulated right now, we have to remember that the state's case is always put on in chronological order, and it should be meant to tell a story. The defense is on defense. And so each witness will feel like they are dropping these disconnected nuggets, but that's exactly what you should expect from the defense's case, and you should expect these defense attorneys to put it all together for the jury in closing.
We've got one more question for you before we get it back to Bob and Emily. What do you make about this line of questioning to the former Delphi police chief about Brad Weber, who's this man that lives across the creek, not far from where the girls' bodies were found? Questions about the white van that Richard Allen said he got scared and saw a white van and left. Questions about his gun. What do you make about that line of questioning?
Well, it's huge. First of all, Brad Weber's credibility is a big issue here because we now understand the exchange between Brad Weber and Rosie and why Rosie's cross was so important. We understand the detail that he was trying to develop was that you can't say only the killer would have known about this white van because in fact, that information is not true. We now understand that by asking Brad Weber, didn't you go out to service the ATMs? He's essentially saying your white van would not have been on that road in that time frame. So if Richard Allen said this, it's because he was going through a mental breakdown and he was making things up. And so we saw him confront Brad Weber about this, and Brad Weber got really defensive, which is curious because he's a witness that shouldn't have a dog in this fight, right? And so now his credibility is at issue in terms of whether we should even believe what he's saying about being on that road at the time. And it's also showing that what he said before was inconsistent with what he said on the stand,
Right.
which highlights that that's not a smoking gun for the state, that Richard Allen knew this mysterious information about this van that only the killer would have known, because in fact, we can't even trust that that's a real fact that actually occurred.
Right. Remember, there was a line of questioning about the bullet, the magic bullet, as they called, that was found in between the girls' bodies. And they were saying that testing on Brad Weber's gun was inconclusive on that bullet.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And that's huge also, just like Bob and Emily were saying.
right.
For Mullen to say, no, his gun was excluded, that's just false. That's a mischaracterization of the evidence, and it's inappropriate for a witness
Right.
of his caliber to make that sort of assertion that's not consistent with what the expert said. Inconclusive means just that, inconclusive. You can't decide one way or the other. So it's completely inconsistent with the evidence for him to say that Brad Weber's gun was excluded. It wasn't.
Right.
So now you have this person whose credibility is at issue, who has proximity to the crime scene, and who's getting all aggressive with defense counsel. It's starting to make him seem a little bit questionable about, his relation to this entire scenario.
And this is going to be interesting for all of us to watch on Monday because, as Bob mentions, Brad Weber is due to be called back as a defense witness on Monday. So it'll be interesting to see what the line of questioning is there.
Absolutely.
Let's get back to Bob and Emily about the other witnesses that were called today.
Yeah, so one of the witnesses, and I guess we should say up front, no real bombshells from the other four witnesses, but we do want to mention them. One of them had specifically to do with Brad Weber. Christopher Godey, he was one of the many officers that flooded into the Delphi area right after these murders took place to try and help with the investigation. He works in northwest Indiana, but he came down as part of an FBI task force. He interviewed Brad Weber along with an FBI agent, and the defense asked Godey what Weber said during the interview, and he said he couldn't remember. He showed him the report of the interview that he and the FBI agent put together and worked on after they had done the interview with Weber, and the defense showed him that report to try to refresh his memory, and then the defense asked him again after he looked at that report, what did Weber say in 2017 in the interview that was conducted with him? And interestingly enough, at that point, he still couldn't remember. Even after reading the report, it was pretty obvious that Christopher Godey did not want to be in court today. He had no interest in... It really seemed like he had no interest in trying to remember. Again, even when he was given a report to read, he read that report, he's like, nope, I still don't remember anything. And at that point, there was no more questioning, there was no cross-examination, he was just let go.
And of course, we found out at the end of the day that the defense is trying to bring that FBI agent back who was with him that day and interviewed Brad Weber, who wrote the report. And the defense has asked, apparently, this FBI agent, and we learned this in court today, right at the end, the defense had filed a motion for him to appear remotely because of apparently some kind of health issue. And Judge Gull denied that. So, so there it is. And basically the argument from the state was, if you want to impeach Brad Weber, talk to Brad Weber. Like let's hear from Brad Weber on Mondays. You don't need to do this remote interview with this FBI agent.
Again,
that's an aside, but
again, Monday's going to be super interesting.
Wild.
So we heard from Brad Heath and David McCain. They are two individuals who live very close. They live just outside of Delphi. Brad Heath, he's retired, but on the day of the murders, he reported back at the time that he saw a blue car parked close to the Monon Trails. He first saw that vehicle at 8:45 in the morning, and then he was in Delphi doing some work that day, and when he left at 2:06, he saw that same vehicle. He reported it to police, and that's what he reported. And again, there was no additional questioning, there was no cross-exam. That was it for Brad Heath.
I was going to say one thing that stuck out to me about that when they were asking him about the car. He said a few years later he was watching the movie The Fugitive, the old version, and he spotted a car in that movie, and that was actually in the exhibits today that we looked at. It was a picture of a vehicle from The Fugitive. So this is what Brad Heath had connected it to, and that's how he recalled it. Yeah.
David McCain, his testimony was actually fascinating today. He knows so much about the bridge. He was on the trails, and he said he was on the bridge on the day that the girls were murdered. And in his testimony, I'm trying to pull up a little bit. He's worked a lot as far as like preservation and creating the trail, so he knows a lot about the bridge. He knows that it's 852 feet long, he testified, and that it's 65 feet above Deer Creek that's below. His testimony was really interesting, but the gist of it was that he was on the trail and he was on the bridge in the vicinity. He said it was sometime between 2 and 4 o'clock on the day of the murders. He took pictures. He went there to take photographs. He ended up giving his SIM card to the FBI for them to check over that, which he said he never got back. He said that he saw a couple walking on the trails. He wasn't exactly sure if it was before or after he was on the bridge. And he described, as he was going back to his car, hearing someone yell, "Hey, have you seen two girls?" And from the description he gave, it seemed as if it was probably Libby's father, who had testified earlier that he was out there and was kind of yelling to people, "Hey, have you seen anyone?" And the description he gave made it seem like it was Derek German that had yelled that. There was some questioning about his timing on the trail during cross-exam, but again, all three of these witnesses, Godey, Heath, McCain, it seemed to be trying to give the jury, again, the impression that these are questions about someone else who might have been out on the trail that day, on the bridge that day, and putting the idea that maybe it was not necessarily Richard Allen who was the only person who was out there who could have done this.
Did you catch a moment where I think it was Baldwin asked him about a picture he took of a fence? Because he said when he came off the bridge, he kind of went down this one little area. Everyone kind of got a chuckle out of it because he said, "Oh, I'm interested in taking pictures of this tree or a fence. I key in on stuff like that." And that when he was taking a picture, I think of the fence. When he's seen that picture later, there's a car in the background. Did you catch that moment? And Baldwin asked, "Hey, did the police ever ask you about that car or any of noticing that?" Do you remember that moment?
Well, he didn't recall. If I remember
there
correctly,
was a lot of
he didn't
not
recall
recalling.
the information. And actually, I wrote down. There were some of the witnesses today that struggled because their memory now, compared to 7.5 years ago, is what it used to be.
Of course, who can blame him?
But the interesting things with David McCain is they asked, "Did you hear any, screaming or anything when you were out on the bridge? Did you hear anything unusual?" And he said he did not. So that was the testimony today. And then we had one other. Daryl Sterrett also testified.
The fire chief, the former fire chief of Delphi. And what's interesting, we're talking about memory. He struggled a little bit when he was testifying, and it left both of us, it left us with the impression, okay, he must be trying to recall things from 7 years ago. And it turns out he was just deposed 3 weeks ago. I think he testified. But Daryl Sterrett talked about the fact that he was at the fire station that night. They were doing some kind of training, so he was there with the firefighters. He is the chief. They were doing some CPR training, and a call came in at dispatch at about 7 o'clock of that night, letting them know that they had 2 missing girls, 2 missing teens. And he said initially what they did is search the town. Some people went and looked in at the basketball game and different things that were going on around Delphi that night to see, okay, maybe could they be there? And eventually they went to the bridge. He testified at 9:30. He took his personal car, but some other fire trucks, firemen and fire trucks apparatuses went with him. And he said, when he got there, he figured, well, he said, it was important. We had 2 girls exposed to the elements, even though we know it had been an unseasonably warm day that day. But he said, my thought was, when he got there, they were hunkered down, cold and scared, and waiting for us to find them. So that's, kind of the idea that he had in his head as they set out. And he described walking through the brush, all of the firemen also being able to see some citizens there in the search. It was very dark. He says they searched the west side of the bridge. They did a general search of the area, the north and south sides of the creek, east and west. There was some lights from the apparatuses. He struggled to kind of remember that, but when he looked at his deposition, okay, he remembered some bigger lights, and then he said that they all had flashlights. Each of the firemen, they all had flashlights, and they were searching around, and they saw nothing. They saw no clothing. They saw nothing that stood out to them. No clothing in the creek, nothing.
And it seemed that the reason that they asked Mr. Sterrett to testify was, again, this idea that they've floated earlier in the trial that maybe the girls were not there all night. They asked, were there lights shining? Did you have lights shining out of this area? Did you see any clothes in the creek? Did you search this area? Seeming to kind of get to the idea that, hey, you guys were out in these areas and you didn't see anything. Were the victims, perhaps, were they killed somewhere else at some other time, and then their bodies were brought here? So seeming to insinuate that, we believe there's a theory that Abby and Libby were not there all night lying dead, that maybe the crime took place somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, insinuating you didn't see anything because there was nothing to see at that point.
8 witnesses today. Again, we know that there were over 120 that the defense put on their potential list. We know a lot of those now are not going to be testifying during this trial because the Odinism theory has been tossed out by Judge Gull. So we have another day of a short day of testimony tomorrow from 9 to 12, and then a much-deserved break for the jury. I believe today was day 17 since they have been sworn in. They've been working hard, and they will get a day off on Sunday, and we will get a day off as well. And then we'll be right back at it come Monday. So, Scott, we're going to send it back to you, and we hope you and Katie have a good weekend, and we'll have more coverage from out here tomorrow on Saturday, because Judge Gull has us going 6 days a week, and the jury going 6 days a week as we try to inch closer to a verdict and giving the jury an opportunity to weigh in on this case after hearing all this testimony.
Right. Bob Siegel and Emily Longneck are doing a really outstanding job bringing us comprehensive coverage of the testimony that takes place in a courtroom that will not allow cameras, and they're doing a great job bringing our viewers all the context of what takes place. Thank you so much for your work, both of you. So we break down the Delphi murders trial every weeknight at 10 o'clock right here on WTHR+. You can also find our ongoing coverage, including detailed reports on each day of this trial, by going to WTHR.com/Delphi. Thanks so much for joining us.